Hello friends, today's story I want to talk about the situation between Russia and Ukraine on May 25. NATO Secretary General, Ukraine should be allowed to use Western weapons to attack Russia. The NATO Secretary General said the West should relax regulations prohibiting Ukraine from using weapons they donated to attack Russian territory. While fighting took place in Kharkov province, Ukraine's prohibition on using Western weapons to attack military targets on Russian territory made it very difficult for them to defend, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg commented on May 24. It is time for NATO allies to consider whether to lift some of the restrictions they have placed on weapons aid to Ukraine. Ukrainian soldiers and officials have long expressed frustration that they can only use domestic unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, which have limited effectiveness, to attack targets on Russian territory. Anger increased after Russia launched the Kharkov campaign on May 10, attacking and controlling many residential areas near the border. According to Mr. Stoltenberg, the Kharkov campaign is unlikely to bring a breakthrough for Russian forces. They will continue to advance, gaining some advantages in border areas. Russia is willing to pay a very high price for these advantages, he said. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said on May 17 that he had asked the West to use their weapons as aid to attack targets on Russian territory. According to Mr. Zelensky, this is defensive as Russia seeks to take advantage of the Ukrainian army's lack of manpower and weapons. Mr. Stoltenberg seems to be aware of the advantage that Russia has when Ukraine is banned from using Western weapons to attack its neighbor. This allows Russia to concentrate troops and military equipment because it knows Ukraine cannot use the most effective weapons to attack across the border, as well as being able to safely launch UAVs like the Lancet model from Russian territory. Mr. Stoltenberg acknowledged that there is a risk of escalation related to the war between Russia and Ukraine, affirming that the alliance has the task of preventing this conflict from becoming a full-scale war between Russia and NATO in Europe. However, he pointed out the difference between providing weapons and training and military intervention. We will train and provide weapons and ammunition to Ukraine. However, we will not directly participate in combat from NATO territory or participate in combat operations in Ukraine, Mr. Stoltenberg said. Ukrainian soldiers driving tanks defected to Russia. Russian officials announced that a Ukrainian soldier drove the unit's T-64 tank to defect to Moscow-controlled areas in Donetsk province. Maxim Anatolievich Lakachev drove the T-64BV tank to the rendezvous point in advance at the Russian line in Donetsk province. He decided to steal the tank because he thought this method was safer and did not worry about being shot in the back, while the officers, Ukrainian officials on the front line will think that tanks are fighting, Daniel Bezhunov, a Russian official in Donetsk province, said on May 24. In the video released later, T-64BV tanks slowly pass by fortifications in the dark under the supervision of Russian special forces. The main gun barrel was held aloft throughout this process, seemingly as a sign to identify the troops and show that the tanks would not harm the Russian forces. Lakachev stepped out and raised his arms, while Russian soldiers approached and continuously pointed the gun at this person. Lakachev was asked to take off his shirt to prove he was not carrying a weapon, then lie down on the ground and put his hands behind his back. Russian special forces controlled and searched the Ukrainian soldier and then took him to a nearby observation point. "Are you okay?" the commander of the Russian soldiers asked. Lakachev replied, "It's okay." Two Russian special forces then released the Ukrainian soldiers, and the unit commander also removed the Ukrainian flag stuck on the sleeve of Lakachev's military uniform. Ukrainian officials believe that Lakachev was recruited by Russia as a mole during his stay in Poland. They believe that he passed information about the location of the Ukrainian brigades to the Russian side, causing all three units in which Lakachev served to suffer heavy losses. Maxim will soon reveal who he met in Poland and why all the brigades in which he served suffered great damage, Bezhunov said. The Russian Ministry of Defense and the Ukrainian army have not commented on the information. This news. Russia wins consecutively. What is the battlefield in Ukraine now? Russian troops have recently controlled many favorable positions across the front line, including areas that Ukraine captured during last summer's counteroffensive campaign. In recent weeks, Russian troops have taken control of many favorable positions across the front line. In some places, Moscow troops even control lands that Kiev regained in tough battles last year. Russia has now gained the largest amount of territory since the end of 2022. This is a worrying situation for Ukraine, which could damage the morale of soldiers and undermine people's confidence. Analysts say Russia may achieve more victories in the coming months while Ukraine waits for US military aid to arrive on the battlefield. Russia appears to be about to retake Robotyne village. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced last week that the country's military had seized Robotyne, a small village in Zaporizhzhia province, southeastern Ukraine. Robotyne village was captured by Ukrainian forces in August 2023, a major but rare success in Ukraine's summer counter-offensive campaign. Robotyne village consists of only a few streets and had a pre-war population of only a few hundred people. It lacks strategic importance to Russia and is now in ruins, but its defeat would be a symbolic blow to Ukraine, which fought so hard to regain it in last year. Russia is expanding its control in the east. Further east, Russian troops entered Klishchivka, a village in Donetsk province that Ukraine regained in September 2023, making one of the most important advances by Kiev troops at that time. On May 21, the Russian Ministry of Defense announced that Russian forces had taken control of the village. Meanwhile, Russian military bloggers and independent analysis groups say Russia currently only controls about half of the village. Ukraine has not commented on this statement. The village of Klishchivka lies just south of Bakhmut, which Russian troops captured after months of fighting last year. Controlling Klishchivka could relieve pressure on Russian troops in Bakhmut and create favorable conditions for Moscow to enter the city of Chasiv Yar, Ukraine's stronghold in Donetsk, located just west of Bakhmut. New front in Kharkiv. Russia's biggest advances this year were in northeastern Ukraine, near the city of Kharkiv province. Russia opened its offensive against Kharkiv about 2 weeks ago and captured settlements that Ukraine regained in the fall of 2022. Russia has continued to attack villages outside Kharkiv and has also stepped up airstrikes on the city itself. On May 23, Mr. Oleh Sinyehubov, head of the Kharkiv region's military administration, said a Russian missile attack on a printing factory killed at least 7 people and 16 others injured. The Ukrainian army has dispatched elite brigades to Kharkiv and appears to have stopped the Russian advance in this area. However, the Russian army now controls more than 180 square kilometers of land in the region, including about 10 settlements. The attack forced thousands of Kharkiv residents to evacuate and saw their homes bombed. Mr. Sinyehubov said nearly 11,000 people have been evacuated from the area in about the past 2 weeks. President Putin said Russia is ready to stop fighting in Ukraine. Russian sources told Reuters that President Vladimir Putin is ready to halt the conflict in Ukraine with a ceasefire recognizing the current battle lines, but Moscow is also ready to fight if Kiev and the West do not agree. Italy. 3 sources familiar with the situation said the Russian leader expressed frustration to a group of advisors about what he considered Western-backed efforts to hinder Ukraine from negotiating with Russia. President Putin can fight as long as he wants, but is also ready to cease fire, to freeze the war, said a high-ranking source who has worked with Mr. Putin. When asked about this information at the meeting press conference in Belarus on May 24, President Putin said that the peace negotiation process should be restarted. Let it resume, President Putin said, saying that negotiations should be based on reality and the plan agreed upon in the first weeks when the conflict first broke out. Not on the basis of what one side wants, he said. Meanwhile, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba wrote on social network X that the Russian leader was trying to derail the peace summit that Ukraine started. Initiative in Switzerland next month, by sending a false signal of readiness to stop hostilities. Western analysts believe that President Putin's appointment of economist Andrei Belousov as Minister of Defense is intended to put the Russian economy in a long-term war. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov affirmed that Russia does not want eternal war. Ukrainian President Zelensky has repeatedly stated that peace under President Putin's conditions is impossible. He vowed to reclaim lost lands, including the Crimean Peninsula that Russia annexed in 2014. He signed a decree in 2022 to officially declare any negotiations with Mr. Khan. One source predicts that no agreement will be reached while Mr. Zelensky is still in power, unless Russia bypasses him and reaches an agreement with Washington. However, speaking in Kiev last week, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken told the press that he did not believe President Putin was interested in serious negotiations. This is the end of the video. Hello and see you in the next newsletters and stories.